Hello and welcome to the Indo GAA podcast. And we start on a somber note this week. Very sad news breaking across the weekend. The death of the former Sunday Game presenter and legendary broadcaster Michael Lyster at the age of 71. Just an iconic character, the face and the voice of many generations of the GAA. His voice and his face boomed into nearly every house in the country, synonymous with GAA, synonymous with hurling and football within this country. And we thought it fitting to get some of his former Sunday Game colleagues together to pay tribute to him. And I'm delighted to have Colm O'Rourke and Pat Spillane with me today to talk about the legend that is Michael Lyster. Lads, how are we doing today? Sad news across the weekend, obviously, Colm. What a man, what a broadcaster, and what a legacy he's left behind.
Yeah, very much so. And of course, sad for Anne and his four children, most of all. I suppose they shared him with the nation every week, and he became sort of a friendly face to everybody on a Sunday afternoon. And when that music came on and he opened the show on the first day of the championship, hello, welcome to the Sunday Game, was always his opening remarks. I think it put people at ease. The summer was coming. The hay was about to be saved. There was no worries about the price of fuel from the Iran war or the weather or anything else. He was sort of a calming influence on the nation.
And just on that, Pat, he was a calming influence on you guys, some of the bigger personalities.
No.
At times he was.
He was an amazing man, in the last. It's only when somebody dies that you suddenly reflect on their life and your involvement in any way in their life. And I was just thinking that in the last 12 months, I lost two great friends who were very central to my life over the last 50, 60 years. I lost Michael Dwyer almost a year ago, and he was central to my life for 17 years as manager of Kerry. And Michael Lyster was central to my life for 27, 28, 29 summers where we shared the studio with the Sunday Game. And I was just thinking about it over the last number of days. In a way, they were both cut from the same cloth. They were both very down to earth, men of the people, very charismatic, complete rogues. But the one thing common denominator about the two of them was they filled you full of belief. Michael filled you belief that you could deliver as a footballer, and he left you off. And Lyster made you believe that what you were saying was the most brilliant piece of analysis ever delivered, and that the nation were gripped to what you were saying. Michael Lyster was so calm, so composed. He was, I believe, the greatest broadcaster we had in this country, but never got the credit he deserved. Why didn't he get the credit he deserved? Because Michael didn't want the credit. Michael didn't want the spotlight to shine on him. Michael had absolutely no ego. And he was dealing with fellas across the table, myself and Brolly, lesser extent O'Rourke, with loads of ego. But Michael was a facilitator. Michael was a moderator. And just Michael, like I said, he was the conductor of our little orchestra for 27, 28 years. And what a little orchestra it was. But like the Sunday Game was the most iconic sports programme on RT for the last 30 years. And Michael was the star.
Just on that, he was the star, but he made sure, Colm, that you guys were the central figures. I was thinking back to, what were his great sound bites. He made sure that you guys had all the great sound bites and that you guys got the time to shine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first of all, he was utterly professional, unruffled, but he realised his role was to spark debate and then take himself out of the equation. And when Joe and Pat were going at it hot and heavy and the temperature was rising, he allowed it to develop. He was a master of his trade in that regard. And he both gave the two lads an opportunity to have their speak. And now, no matter how outrageous it appeared at the time, and I think that added to the success of the game, because no matter where you went on a Monday, people would have an opinion on the Sunday Game. And it was good to spark debate. Some people would say, I think what Pat Spillane is saying is absolute rubbish. What Joe Brolly is saying is absolutely brilliant. But there was loads of people who wanted to tune in and to see whether or not they agreed or disagreed vehemently with what was being said. I think that was the success of the programme. I don't think too many people could have done it except Michael Lyster, because the great broadcasters, you know, when you think of Gay Byrne or Michael Parkinson or Graham Norton, people wonder why are they always so good at their trade. They have a natural feel for it. Michael Lyster had this great natural feel for the temperature of a particular debate that was going on, and he'd intervene if it got too much out of hand. But generally speaking, he sort of allowed it to develop, and it added to the gaiety of the nation.
Pat, he was right in the middle of what I would say was, sports punditry and broadcasting at its very best. I think of Tom McGurk and the rugby guys. I think of Bill O'Hurley and the soccer guys. And I think of Lyster, O'Rourke, Brolly, Spillane, Cyril Farrell, Gerlach Nan. It was right in the middle of it. It was a different time. It was a great time. It's a completely different climate we're looking at now.
It was a golden era for broadcasting, and unfortunately, should it have still continued? Of course it should have. It's a bit like a friend of mine said one time, getting rid of those celebrity pundits, as they were called. They were box office, but getting rid of them was a bit like, a friend said, this is exactly what he said. He said, it's like a fellow taking over McDonald's and deciding, we're not going to sell burgers anymore. You've taken your best product away, and that's what they did with the Sunday game and the punditry. Now, can I just say
modesty would normally forbid you, Pat, from saying anything.
We have a special guest.
Not only was I the greatest footballer that ever lived, but I also
before Joe pops in,
and it pains me to say it, also the greatest pundit that ever lived.
I'll just say a couple of things. And look, we had great years together, and people say, what was it like, and whatever like that. And we were talking about it to Colin just earlier on. We never ever fell out in our life. We were great friends. There was never a crossword that passed our lips. We were just good friends. Why were we successful? We were three lads shooting the breeze, giving our honest opinion. The people of Ireland loved it. And, we were the three boys at the bar counter talking about a game. Lyster was the conductor, barman inside, listening and keeping the old crack going. But it was great, great days. And it's great to see Joe here as well, sir. I'll give Joe a chance to talk.
Joe, you've graced us with your presence. Just on Michael, what a man, what a broadcaster, and so many of your best memories in life and in sport outside of playing must be in that studio with him.
Well, I mean, I think I had a slightly better social life than you're making it out. I'd be really. But you see, I went in. I did it the way RT Sport worked. It's a good example of the difference. Michael understood that this was about entertainment, and we were brought in to entertain. I don't mean light entertainment, but there was that as well, the fun, the fury. Everybody talking about it. I mean, Mary Hannigan did a column every Monday in the Irish Times when we were on, every Monday, just centered on the debates that we'd had. And it gave, and Lyster understood that it was about entertainment. But whenever I was asked to go into the Sunday game the first time, we had just beaten Meath in a league game, and they were giving me the man of the match. And the interview was very funny. I got awful giddy, and I got a phone call that night from the producer Bill to say, Joe, you wouldn't fancy coming in to the Sunday game? I said, fucking brilliant! Hello world. I thought you'd never ask. And Michael, the difference then, I suppose, it was a bit like Gay Byrne, whenever he was in his pomp, and the stories about if a guest was interesting and it was taking it in an interesting direction and people were hooked, well, the other guests would be told they could go home. We're not going to reach you. It was the same with Michael. He was the king in his domain. He ran the thing, and we all were able to express ourselves.
Fair to say,
with very few limits.
He tactically, Joe, he always sat beside you. He told me a couple of years ago to try and keep you on whatever rein he possibly could.
Yeah, well, also to keep me away from Colm, because Colm had a habit if he got upset with me, and every now and again, I would. And Colm's not easy to upset. So it was always a challenge. A couple of times he hit me. One time, do you remember, he hit me? Oh Jesus! He just bang in the ribs for whatever I'd said. I can't remember what it was.
And, it was probably very sensible.
It was, just the type of behaviour you'd expect of a prominent headmaster.
Yeah, but I think Michael and Joe, one of the important things which Michael had at that time, and I go back to the time of Paul Burns and Bill Lawler and people like that, who were the producers of the Sunday game, and they sort of said to Michael, "You go and do your job. We're not going to go giving you rules and regulations, and you can say this and you can't say that. Let the conversation flow, and we trust you to sort it out." And that was very, very important as well. I think probably the same does not apply anymore.
And it's a really difficult thing to do, to be an effortless anchor. We all recall the disaster when Pat was made the anchor for the Sunday Game nighttime program, or Barry McGuigan got the chat show on the BBC, because we all think, oh yeah, that's straightforward. Right. In fact, it's a really complex job that depends on your personality, and he was born to that.
Yeah, I remember. I mean,
terribly afterwards. Like,
you must remember. I want to put on record that I lasted longer than these boys. They were sacked before me, Brolly and O'Rourke. So I lasted a little bit longer by accident. I don't know.
Not, however, as the Sunday Game nighttime actor.
But I mean, at the end of the day, it was so scripted. It was so PC. There was nights I was going home and I was saying I could have phoned it in because it was so. But like the great thing about Leicester was
robot in Japan, that can do the set answers.
But the great thing about Leicester, like I said, there was no script, there was no plan. He could, and Joe just mentioned, he could make it look so easy. And that's the hallmark of a genius that can make things so easy that for 4 hours on live TV, without a single note, he could carry. But what he was, I remember being with Gay Burton on the Late Late Show. He was a brilliant listener. And if he knew, there's a good debate starting, Michael decided to leave it go. Whereas nowadays, time restraints, we have to go.
You would have had trouble, Michael, at times if you were, a tourist coming into. You would have trouble trying to make out who the anchor was. That was his trick.
Yeah, and just even thinking, I'll come to you, Colin, first. So, I was just, a young
now
guy.
Michael, what it was like on the Sunday game.
Yeah.
I was wheeled out just very occasionally.
Well, I tell you what, I have an even bigger appreciation for what Michael Lyster did for so many years after the short experience today. But when I think about my memories growing up, all the great moments, anything to do with the Sunday game, he was there. Whether it was something what Joe said, something what Pat said, some sort of debate, you hitting Joe a clip or whatever. Is there any particularly abiding memory that you say, geez, remember that? Remember when we did this or whatever, and Michael facilitated that. What's the standout thing from your punditry time with Michael Lyster?
Well, I suppose there was loads of incidents. I suppose Joe, with his rant about black card, before the introduction of the black card, and Pat about Tyrone, they were all very, very famous ones. And again, sparked a lot of debate. I think I made a comment about a referee, and Michael had nearly a fit one day when a certain referee, and he was asking me at halftime how did I think he was doing, and I didn't think he was doing very well. And he was a small man, and I said to Michael, well, it just shows you should never send a small man to do a big job.
The other thing about Michael is that because he walked among the people, and he was very, Pat was very shy, for example. Pat would tell you himself, he is a very shy person outside of the studio. Pat would get a taxi, make sure he didn't meet anyone. He would be arriving into Croke Park a few hours before everybody else. He'd be there. Michael walked through the crowds. He loved all of that. And he loved the rally. I got into a rally, made the mistake of getting into a rally car with him once. He says, it's great, it's only for charity, Oh, Jesus Christ. First of all, they put a fireproof suit on me. And then whenever the guy started to show me how to use the fire extinguisher, I said, oh, Jesus Christ. Lister saying, right, let's go. And he handed me a book, and he said, there's the notes, just read.
I was going to ask you, yeah. You were directing him, basically.
And the car's going, getting ready to go, and the marshal's going, and the thing took off, and I was engulfed in shock. I mean, it was like, right, and it just exploded out, and hedges are flying past you. And I thought, I'm going to have a heart attack. I said, Michael, and he was roaring at me, for fuck's sake, what's the fucking thing? And he said, breathe, breathe, you're not breathing, you know. And then that was replaced.
Yeah,
When I get terrified, I just laugh all the time. And I just
come-
laughed and wheeze was louder. But
he
the only
do
time I ever saw him angry was when he was in and around that rally car. He could lose his temper there. But aside from that, I mean, he was absolutely unflappable. He was like Colm.
Actually, he used to do the Rally of the Lakes in Killarney, you know, and he'd always call to me on the Thursday or the Wednesday, Thursday when he'd be doing the recce. And then the rally would start on the Saturday. And then I'd say, Michael, I'll be on the road now when you'll be passing. Michael never passed because Michael usually crashed in the first or second leg. He wasn't the greatest rally driver in the world now.
Jesus, it was genuinely terrifying. Like that terror that means you don't have time to think about anything. You're just in a tunnel, and like whenever the car stopped, you're like,
it's the gas.
And he loved that. Yeah. He loved that. He loved that adrenaline, and I did always wonder. I did worry about him because he could, because he was so loved around the Sunday game, and he was the king. He lived beside RT, so he could wander in. He could have his socializing. He was there for the meetings. He did everything, the Olympics. He loved it all, and I did worry for him after he had to retire, because I think he had to retire. Did he not come under that sort of civil servants rule in RTE?
Well, it's a bit like everybody else, Joe. I think the point you're making is well made, and it's the same with retirement in any form of life. And particularly with footballers, the roar of the crowd you can miss for quite a while, and it's the same in private life as well. And Michael had such a warm, friendly, courteous. He was a man of integrity. He was at home on the television. It does seem a bit ridiculous that he had to go at that time because he had so much more to give. He was a wonderful presenter. There's not too many like him.
No. Yeah, actually, and Joe this morning sent me on some lovely photographs, and it was the last time that we appeared together on stage, which was a couple of years ago in New York. Do you remember we were doing a fund for New York GAA, and we did a great night. And Michael would always privately say, exactly, just reiterating what Colm said, Michael didn't want to retire. Michael wanted to continue with the Sunday game. Michael wanted to continue with the band, and unfortunately rules and regulations saw him not being. But and I think of one thing, and we had lots of passionate debates. We were out of control on many a day. And as somebody said earlier on, not once did he raise his voice. He didn't have to raise his voice, because when Michael put out that big right hand, you stopped. You knew you had gone too far.
Just on you, Pat, any particular kind of abiding memory?
Well, you see, myself and Joe would have we said there was nothing prepared, right? So we had nothing prepared. What topics are we going to discuss today? What angles are we approaching? Have we pieces of analysis? Absolutely nothing at all. Nothing. So we'd be flying by the seat of our pants. But the only thing that was decided before going on air was the music is playing. Michael would decide who was going to be asked the first question. Now, being asked the first question was vital, because poor old Colm was sitting there nice and quietly. But if Brolly got the first question, fuck it, that was the first half of the programme gone, because he'd occupied that. Or if I got the first question, that was the first half, because I dominated. And like Brolly and Joe, in fairness, Joe got most of the first questions because A, he was sitting alongside Michael, but B, he was always pulling his trousers to say, ask me the first question, ask me the first question, ask me.
That's completely
and in fairness, Leicester couldn't ignore him.
Well, you see Michael now this debate.
I'm sorry, just to finish off, if I did get the first question, and as usual, I'd be talking shite and talking too long. So Joe, invariably, Joe would then put his head on Michael's shoulder and pretend to be sound asleep. And I'm here trying to stay serious, trying to make the most brilliant, insightful piece of analysis point ever. And Joe is asleep on the table, or on Michael's shoulder. That was the crazy, wonderful world that was the Sunday.
I brought a bell in one time. And I said to Michael, look, whenever Pat starts to go over, I'll just ring the bell, right? He said, "Oh, great idea." It actually said "ring for sex" on the bell. It was a bell. I got it in a wee sort of one of these wee bric-a-brac shops. We used to have an awful chuckle,
Michael,
the off-air stuff was great.
We never got
and the big thing about it too,
in the way of a good story.
No, that's important. It's very important.
And you know, in the early
big thing
days,
was, hold on, Pat, the big thing was that when you were going, you really enjoyed it. You know, you were going, it wasn't a chore, it wasn't work, it was like, oh, this is going to be fun. You know, this is going to be great. You know, whether we were fighting over whether Michael Murphy was a great player or some political issue that had
we didn't give a shite.
Society.
Sure, lads, that's not a job at all. That's the great thing, isn't it?
No.
Like, it wasn't a job.
Sure, it isn't a job. Anybody
Yeah.
can talk about football. I mean, you could get thousands and thousands of people to bore you senseless about football. Let me say this to you, Michael. If the sort of thing that's being discussed at the minute in the Sunday game, if they brought that into the Dungiven clubhouse on a Sunday night and started to talk like that about football, somebody would say those people aren't well. There's something, they're not right. Nobody talks about Gaelic football like that, ever. I've never, ever heard it. Ever.
But you're right, Joe, because the GAA is about fun. It's about crack. It's about opinions. It's about argument.
Drama.
And drama. And we merely reflected that. And at the end of the day, yes, people want to know why some team won a game. Yes, people want to know why a team lost. But they don't want in-depth analysis of the zonal kick-out strategy by whatever like that. They want a bit of fun. They want a bit of crack. And as Colm said earlier on, television is about entertainment, and for 20-something years, we provided them with entertainment.
The last one I'll throw to the tree, you had great on-screen times. I'd imagine you had some great crack off-screen nights after big shows, All-Ireland final nights, etc.
Colm doesn't really drink, which I was shocked by because, you know, he's a big man. But he doesn't really drink, you see. So on the social life, Colm is really a sophisticated, extremely sophisticated social life. So Colm's a bit more. Colm goes in the private jets to the big race meets. You know, he's at Ascot. He's at Ascot in a top hat. You know, he's mixing with Tichy and with, you know, French presidents. Colm lives in a much different stratosphere.
Yeah, it's a rarefied atmosphere. Apart from that, I wasn't a big socializer and never was. I generally was involved in games, and no matter what I tended to go home. I didn't socialize much. I didn't change that much with the Sunday game. But in the final comments about Michael, I think his personality, his greatness, his easy touch, and he wore it all so easily. And he was really a common man, but not an uncommon man.